Well, I gave you multiple points. Look, Alanah, you can edit whatever you want. You can talk about my plunging neckline. You can talk about the fact that I won't pee in front of other people. Or the pee fountains in London. There you go.
That's
hey,
the
everybody,
cutoff.
welcome
The
to
pee
Play Watch
fountains
Listen.
in London. That's the cutoff. And then,
What I love is that this whole thing even started with Troy going, "Mike, are you okay? Are you like?" So you
I'm not now.
Not now. I'm very uncomfortable.
He was fine. Now he's not.
I was. Now I'm not good. Not good.
All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Play, Watch, Listen. I'm Alanah. I am joined by Austin Wintory, Troy Baker, and Mike Bithell, all of whom work in the games industry in multiple full-time capacities. And today... Oh, hang on. Let me just hold mine up, too. We all have to do it. Austin, do you not have a...
Wait, is yours hot?
I get...
Mine is hot, yeah.
Oh, that's weird.
Cool, thanks. Salt my coffee. It's fine. It's whatever. Today we're going to talk about, and I'm actually pretty excited to talk to you guys about this because I've spoken to everyone about the narrative. But we're actually going to
Plague Tale.
I haven't played it yet. I'm so sorry. About the design aspects of The Last of Us Part 2. I wanted to talk about some of the very unique things that I think that it does, and definitely the sound as well, which I hope you paid attention to, Austin. As sound guy.
I'm ambivalent.
Great. Excellent. Just for public purposes, can we get a read on where everyone is at progress-wise?
Roll credits.
Finished it.
Roll credits.
Same. I powered through, especially because obviously we had to push this recording back a couple days, and I really wanted to finish it in time for the initial recording date, but also just out of self-preservation on Twitter and Instagram. I was like, I know that it's a minefield of spoilers, and if I don't do this, I may as well. So yeah,
a lot of the spoilers that I had read before finishing it did not turn out to be true, which is funny. People were making up things. So like, there was a spoiler about one major character dying that didn't, and I was like, okay. Well, I appreciate that I didn't know that.
I also think some of the spoilers...
I heard far more characters like, oh, this person dies, and this person dies, and this person dies. And I was like, no, you got all of those wrong. There's other people that do die that don't. That
biggest spoiler I had that ended up not being true.
Aliens.
Which I was like very interested to see if it happens or not. And I don't think that this is a spoiler for me to tell you that it's not a spoiler, Mike, because it's ridiculous anyway. But I was like, oh, maybe.
Yeah. I'm the only one. I think I'm the only one who's not finished it. And to be clear, like with everyone on this call, like I'm fine with like within reason. Like don't spoil like major plot points, but I don't care if we talk about like levels I've not seen or enemies I've not thought or whatever.
Sure.
Okay.
So within reason, like use your discretion.
WLF wanted to kill Ellie because they were a homophobic organization, and I was like,
how about that?
That would be a strange choice. I wonder how they're going to pull that off.
It's an incredibly motivated one as well to travel that far to try and do it.
This just would raise the question of how that you would even know that. You know?
Yeah, you throw a bucket of facts out as leaks without any context, and so people start drawing their own conclusions, and they start mixing groups and saying, oh, then that's what these people are, and the WLF are this religious zealot group that are homophobic, and I was like, no. You're not right at all. You're completely off base.
It's like those newscasts.
I love the one that Abby is trans. I'm like, okay, no.
The point is she could be, but also it's never brought up and completely irrelevant.
Austin made that as like she turned herself into a machine. It's like that's absolutely what happened. Like,
well, that's also a one that I found tough talking to people about because people keep. I feel like there are a lot of people saying they've played this game who haven't, and they're like, how did Abby possibly in this world get that way? And like, have you seen her complex? Have you heard all of those gameplay segments, which weren't in cutscenes, where she constantly talks about not wanting to miss training and how important training is to her?
Yeah.
She also goes over like her motivation for deciding to get strong is being useful to an organization where she's been kind of cast out in the world with no allegiances. So she turns into a soldier, so she's useful to them. It's like quite well explained. Like they're like, here's her gym. Here's why she does it.
I also think that just from a super basic world building standpoint, there's no way that every single surviving human is not ripped to a certain degree, just given the shit they have to endure just to literally live day by day.
That's all you do in your spare time, right?
Like there is no such thing as spare time. That's the thing. It's like, I want to have a sandwich, so I'm going to go battle through 50 clickers and like violent Naughty Dog set pieces of rolling through the floor and all this, and then I'll get my sandwich, and then I'm going to head back. It's like a week of that, and everybody's just like, sup, you know? I mean, it's just,
you are a paleo man. Like, you go forage for your food.
Yeah, I thought that the reactions to the leaks and like the kind of cherry picking of facts and then building narratives that turned out not to be true reminded me very much of when, if you're watching live news coverage of massive Supreme Court decisions, where they basically hand the journalists like, here's this decision, and it's a 100-page document, and the person, I've seen this where they run towards the cameras holding a thing they have not read, and they're like flipping through, looking for keywords and going, oh, so it looks like Justice Stevens said this and this, and they're like trying, because they have live TV there, you know, it's 24/7. So they're desperately trying to glean like an official legal opinion in real time. It's such a train wreck. They always misreport. They always say things that are out of context, or they're misquoting. And it's like a week later, the dust has settled and people are saying, here's what it actually said.
To bring it back to design, I am really curious. I almost want to be like a fly on the wall listing, because I want to know, Alanah, I know you're incredibly stringent in particular. Like, you have, when it comes to design, I'm really curious to see. I know there are some thoughts you've shared about the narrative, but I am really curious to see what you thought of the design, and I want to know what Mike thought of the design.
I have a question before you answer that. But because I'm curious. I want to know your opinion as a framing device on this conversation. Is it worth? I know, Mike, that this would be a very tentative answer from you, but from the two of you, from Troy and Alanah, I'm very curious your just top level review. Troy, it's maybe completely impossible for you to give any sense of but I'm curious if it's good or bad to listen through the lens of I loved it, or I have mixed thoughts, or I hated it, or whatever in between, versus just here's the minutia of like this specific. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing to know. Here's my thought on design.
My footnotes is I think it's beautiful. I really enjoyed the gameplay, whereas I didn't like the gameplay that much in the first game. So like, I loved the combat. I stopped playing and immediately started playing it again, and there are very few games that I do that with. I have issues with the pacing. Mostly, I kind of think the game's too long. There are just some segments that I feel like drag. And my biggest issue was technically a narrative one, in that there are just characters that I just couldn't get attached to, so things that were happening didn't mean as much to me. But everything to do with Joel and Ellie just repeatedly was like kicking me in the nuts. Like, I cried at the end. So it's not like it didn't have impact. Like, I was very upset at that final cutscene. But yeah, I feel like I do feel positively about it overall, but I don't feel like it's a 10 out of 10, which is the thing that you don't generally need to say. It's only something that even occurs to you when it gets so many 10 out of 10s.
Right.
Mike or me? Who's going next?
You. Mike hasn't finished it.
Well, either. I mean,
I can give you my feelings so far, honestly.
Yeah, I'm curious where it's trending currently.
It's almost identical to what Alanah said. I think mechanically, it really came together. It feels like a nice second pass at a lot of the ideas from the first game in a way that I like. Beautiful to look at, amazing technical skill across the board. Narratively, I am, because I've not gotten to the end yet, like, I'm definitely like, where's this going? Is this, like, from a pacing point of view, I don't have a sense of what it's building towards or where it's going, which is exciting. I think the thing I said to someone the other day was, so far I love the narrative design, but I don't think I like the story. I like how it's telling its story. I just don't know if I like the story yet. But as I've not finished it, obviously I feel massively. It's
an interesting distinction. I feel like I would like to get into that for people who have no idea.
We can totally do it.
That's a good one. Yeah. Troy.
I feel after playing it that there is not a single moment that is not earned. There is not a single element to the story that is not thoughtfully, methodically, carefully curated. And I've never had a game, either in narrative design, presentation, mechanics, anything, that has so rejected the notion that we must make sure the player feels X. And by and large, that is a feeling of satisfaction, That is, the player feels this is important, that the player is engaged. I feel that this game, in every aspect, where the world building, the character, the narrative, the mechanics, everything, the pacing especially, is like, sorry, this is the story that must be told. Is it too long? Yes. Yes. Is it arduous? Yes. Is it exhausting? Yes. Because that's the story. If you cut a single level, and there's even stuff where I was texting Austin, I was like, I've got to be done. He's like, no, dude, you still have a lot more to go. I was like, what else can there be? And that's the point of the story, because the game doesn't serve my desires at all. It doesn't seek to make sure that I'm comfortable and that I had a good time. It goes, sorry, we're not there yet. And in order to get to that final moment, you had to have taken a step in everybody's shoes and every step that they did. I've never experienced anything like it. And I feel more than GTA, more than Red Dead, and more than Death Stranding, it will probably have, I wouldn't be surprised if it had the lowest completion rate, vastly under what Part 1 was. Simply because
it's about double the length, if I remember correctly.
Easily. Because, Part 1 was 10 to 12 hours. And this is clocking in at, on average, 27 to 30. So if there's rabbit runs that have been, but I still think rabbit runs are hitting around 20. There's just
someone managed to get 16, but I'm still confused by that, because I'm like, then you would have missed every part of the world building, which is like sort of half the point of a Naughty Dog game.
Not only that, but I'm just, as far as like Golden Path Rabbit Run, the thing that the game does a lot, like there's stuff where I'm like, I don't want to be in a forest walk right now talking to X character. I don't want to do that. It's like, I don't give a fuck. But this is what's happening right now.
Strongly in agreement that they had a vision and they stuck to it, and no part of this doesn't feel intentional and planned, and some of the things that happened that I didn't like or I wouldn't do were frustrating to watch in a way that did not feel like it was a disservice to me, but that it was a bold choice that a team stuck to, which I generally always want from creatives.
Yeah, it was not a disservice to the player, it was a service to the story. And everything in there services the story. But in doing so, if you started to go, well, let's just roll this back so that the player doesn't feel like they've been off the stick for almost 15 minutes at one point.
Damn.
That's insane to do. You never do that. It used to be 60 seconds before the player needs to be back on the stick. Let's do a 90-minute. There is one cutscene where you have no gameplay for like 15 to 20 minutes. It's an episode of television.
There are 11 hours of cutscenes in total.
Wow.
I would not be surprised, including the in-game cinematics. Yeah.
I'm nowhere near as far in as I think I am I?
No.
I mean, the thing is, Mike.
No, I mean, you're not even like a third.
Your nails have grown just long enough to scratch the surface.
Yeah, that's the thing. The game, and I really don't want to spoil anything, but the game takes this pivot where you think, oh wow, maybe I'm at the end, and then you realize at best I'm halfway.
And by the way, that doesn't spoil anything for you, Mike, because everybody told me that. And I was like, oh, okay, this is the point where we're going to get to. You're like, and you're always cresting over another horizon.
Yeah, that was my.
Which sounds from what you're saying, like that's intentional, right? That's what they're
absolutely. It's really Nobody does that. Everybody scopes, right? You go, we're going to cut this level. We got to cut this whole big set piece.
Well, I was going to say that's what's interesting about this is like in terms of like studios who can decide to make a game that is kind of making choices like that. Yeah. That's a very short list. I can't do that. I don't have the resources, the audience buy-in, the platform support. I don't get to make a game like that. So I'm glad someone is. I'm glad they're trying it. Exactly, right.
It's not only who can, it's like who does.
I mean, the fact that it's as long as it is, and like there is one particular thing and I'm like, I just would have cut that. Like I just don't know why I need to see that at all. Like it felt weird. But the story being as long as it is very much lines up with everyone's just fucked and tired by the end of it.
Yes. Like I was exhausted.
If you're supposed to be exhausted as well, and it's funny, I actually started recording. I wanted to get my reaction to the ending. So I started recording what I thought would be the ending. And then it was another hour and a half after that, even. So it's an hour and a half long.
That exactly what you're talking about, and that's the exact point. That's the point of the story. It's like we could end right here, Roll credits right here on a beautiful shot right here. But that's not the story. And that to me is what is so wonderfully and beautifully tragic about, oh my God, about all of this.
Do you think the audience is less inclined to, like, do you think the reason so many people have been wound up, and I don't know what percentage of the audience is or whatever, by that kind of, that vibe, do you think that that's just because the moment we're all living through is already quite stressful, and like, do you think this would have been better received?
No, I don't think it's that.
2020 without this? Or?
I think if this game came out 2 years ago, we would have had a completely different response, even with the leaks. Even with the leaks, we would have had a completely different response. The culture that we have right now, that has grown over the last 4 years specifically, is one that says, regardless of truth, regardless of facts, regardless of, empirical evidence, my opinion will not change. And in fact, the more you tell me, the more I will dig my heels in and pour the concrete on my own shoes in order to solidify my position. Period.
I think, we certainly are in a culture like that right now, but I also think because this game does so much stuff that you don't like and you aren't supposed to like, I frankly think that it is something that people who spend a lot of time playing video games, which often service the player, just don't like that. And I completely get that, because it is very unique in the way that it doesn't give you what you want to see or what you want to happen. The ending is, I was just fucking sad. I was just so sad. And it could have serviced me. It could have given me another hero's journey like every other video game generally does.
Power fantasy.
Yeah, but because it doesn't do that, I actually think that is very jarring to people who have played a lot of AAA video games generally, because you're used to a certain kind of response when you play a video game, and not getting that can make you fucking miserable. It really can. And I just feel like that there's a disconnect between, I recognize that you were doing this to the credit of a story, which is how I feel, but I still get the other perspective of people being like, this isn't what I wanted to happen. I don't feel fulfilled. And I get both sides. I feel like, okay, there's some sides that I don't get. I genuinely actually have seen some just blatantly homophobic shit. That can just get out of here. That also exists. But I just think that this game is so unique in the way that it approaches storytelling that it's really frustrating for people. And that makes me go, well, then I hope we get more games like this, because it's doing something really different.
I think it goes further though. I think also the fact that it's a sequel that's building on very directly building on the prior game, where the first one, obviously it funnels towards that discomfort for the player. The first one ends up where Joel is not really a morally defensible hero by the end, or at best you're ambivalent about Joel, but the game it kind of narrows to that point at the very end, whereas he's a little bit more he's a thorough guy, but you can project, I think, a kind of traditional hero on him more towards until the very end, where then it gets messy and it's the gloves really come off. But then the thing is, with the second game, you are starting from that position and just going vastly farther into the realm of gray morals and really
these
just
people
ugly.
You love might be pieces of shit, and so is everyone else in the world. Yeah.
So we're not building to that as the conclusion. We're living in that for the entirety of the game. And that's why I think, because I remember, Troy, it really stuck with me when you mentioned, I think it was last week, of how somebody read the leaks and reached out to you and was like, this so crushed me, and the first game meant so much to me, and they felt like they were kind of betrayed by the sequel. And I remember thinking, that's just bound to happen, because you reach this very precipitous ending, and then it could go so many different ways. And I feel like the only sort of savvy, not to chastise that random person, but you just have to be willing to accept that this is going to go places you can't predict, and that you're going to probably be uncomfortable with, just by virtue of where the last one ended. Well, right?
We did by and large as participators in that story, from an observational standpoint, players of this story, players of the game, we de-vilified and glorified and heroified Joel. And so, therefore, we absolved him of his sins, even if we wrestled with his decisions. And we could say we disagree with him and we'd admonish his choices, but we loved him. And therefore, he became ours. And so we now possessed him.
Hate the sin, love the sinner.
I love him so much. And I think part 2, the stuff that you see of Joel just made me love him even more. Which
Absolutely.
is also a very specific choice where, like, that was the one that I most fundamentally disagreed with, seeing people say, like, this game disrespects Joel. This game makes Joel...
Man, what a bizarre take.
Just the most sweet, loving human. Like, he's softened, and he's just so fucking nice. And every time that you see him, he's basically fighting for Ellie in some way or another, and it's so hard to watch that and then also have to think, here's why people hate him, and
especially as Ellie,
this person is holding a grudge.
But specifically, I want to hone in on something, because specifically in Austin, what you said about with that person, and by and large, what a lot of people have said is that Joel did not deserve this. He didn't deserve this.
I don't disagree.
And well. But
I don't agree or disagree. He sort of did.
Joel. That doesn't mean Neil Druckmann made a bad call as a creator. It just means, yes, I don't think that like within the world, I don't think Joel deserved that.
It's not but here's the point.
But that doesn't make it a bad. It makes it a good game.
This world does not deal in those terms.
Exactly.
Of what you deserve or don't deserve. Joel dying was not a punishment, nor was his living a reward. It simply was the whims of this world granting him another day or not on this specific
Can I just jump in with an opinion on the first game?
Please.
Just in terms of story? I think you're right in terms of I think the first game told you it was about that kind of dog eat dog, real world, or like very cynical kind of world and an awful future. But it wasn't in terms of, and I wonder if this is where the disjoint's happening. The first game is a hero narrative. It is a story about a character kind of becoming a good man. And in the terms of how the ending of the first one's handled, yes, there's some ambiguity, but the game thinks he was in the right. Like, in terms of the text that's being shown on screen, the upbeat guitar solo playing as they go off literally into the sunset, he's the hero. He just saved the day. There's ambiguity, there's nuance, that's what makes it great. But the first game definitely ends with the idea Joel is a hero who did a good thing. It's a in my opinion, like, I mean, you played him, so I'm not going to tell you the truth of it, but like, as a viewer, that felt like it was a very interesting kind of hero's journey, but it was a story about a guy who started off with, trauma. He can't save his daughter, and he's a bad person in the past, and that's established. And then through the events of the story, he becomes a good person, and he does save a young woman. It's kind of that classic kind of hero with a problem who fixes it, is how I interpreted that first game. So I can understand that the second game, so far as I've got into, seems to be committing much more to the central conceit of its world, which is, no, this isn't convenient. This isn't a hero narrative. This is, a dog-eat-dog world. But I can understand why players didn't feel that was what the first game was. The first game was kind of, it's kind of like the second, is it Infinity War or Endgame, the second one of those Avengers movies. It opens with like 40 minutes of it's the end of the world, but as an audience member, it's not. Like, that like we're in an Avengers movie here. So for me, the first game is Avengers. The second game so far is like Cormac McCarthy, kind of like it's all fucked. That's the difference, I think, and that's. So I can understand that thought process, even if that's not the intention, obviously, of all the people who made it.
I think, leaks or not, people would have been mad because the themes that it deals with are almost there to challenge you.
Yeah, brutal.
It makes you do things that you don't want to do, and see things from characters that you love from someone else's perspective, who sees Joel as the person who ruined the fucking world. And I get that no matter what, it would have been divisive, I think. But I would really love to talk about just
the design.
The design. We're still technically talking about narrative design this whole time, I think. But I mean, the one thing that I actually think is that I've mentioned a few times now, that stands out to me, because no game has ever done it to me before, is, I don't remember if I mentioned this last week, looking at the clickers and the shamblers physically disgusts me to the extent that I feel like I want to throw up. And I've never had that in any game before, ever, where my mouth waters because I want to vomit, because these things are so well designed.
Specifically the shamblers.
Yeah, the clickers get me when I see them up close, but then I feel like their sound design's improved a ton too. But then there's also like every moment of you stabbing someone and hearing them choke on their own blood, and a dog dying, and it's just every piece of that.
Dogs.
But if I may, and Mike, this is no spoiler. Specifically speaking to design, there's only one time where the game forces you to kill a dog.
Don't you have to be
I would have thought this
ridiculously stealthy in order to
avoid that? I avoided them for the most part.
You can choose to die. You could choose to die. But there's only one point where the game goes, now there's a narrative beat that we're going to tell.
Yeah, that's why I would have thought there was two, but I guess maybe one of them you don't have to.
You don't have to. There's just
that's still the stuff
one
that gets me. The dog stuff really did get me.
Fucking
hard.
Sucks. It sucks. And I am not. Wow.
Yeah, playing the game, Angela and I kept trading the controller back and forth, and she's like a supremely hardcore dog person, and so every time one of those crossroads came up, it was just like this visceral gasp of horror. Mm-hmm. And I would sometimes apologize in advance because, like, every now and again, like, she would check her phone or something while I was invariably exploring opening drawers and crafting med kits, and then I'd see a dog, and I would just turn her and be like, I'm just giving you a warning of what's probably about to happen, and it's awful, and I hate it, and so be it.
Did actually, I don't know how you guys approach this, and I think this is like one of the things that I like the most about the game, is that you really can approach different combat scenarios in very different ways. So I went stealth everywhere that I could, and there are two parts where I managed to get through either without killing anyone or just by taking a couple of people down that were massive. Like complexes that felt like they had, I don't know, 50 people. It probably wasn't that many, but so many that I managed to just completely avoid killing anyone. And then to the end of one of those, they finally caught me. So I just ran. I was like, not doing it. Just gonna run. And you can do that in virtually every segment that has a dog as well. I managed to completely avoid them.
And you're encouraged to, actually. The game is constantly telling you, is like, if you are outnumbered, your chances of survival are better if you just run. This is not a stand your ground, blow them up and everything. It's like, if you want to do that, now there's a part of me that now going through the world, especially with the option that you have at the end of the game to be able to go back, I'm like, I've never wanted an open world Last of Us game with no narrative. I just want to go and hunt clickers. That's all I want to do. I just want to be able to go through and like you would do any other kind of hunting, which you shouldn't do. But when it comes to clickers or shamblers or whatever the fuck that thing is in the hospital, gosh, Mike, you're not there, and I was just like, bravo, because it was goddamn. I died. I almost threw the controller at that point. That thing was That fight is very tough because I had this thing where I kept being like, I don't know when it's going to end. I don't know. How does this keep happening? It's intense. And that I like that they only really relied on that type of fight once. Like that is very unique in that game. But generally, yeah, the sense of freedom is something that I feel was very different to even the first game. It's a lot less. I feel like maybe part one is a little bit more Uncharted, where it is a little bit more shoot everything. Why not? It is also going back and playing a little bit of it, much more of a walk down a hallway. Here's a combat arena, walk down a hallway. Part two is so big, and they do such a good job of hiding where your invisible walls are, and also with teaching you what things you can't interact with in ways that I feel like most people probably won't even notice. Like, for example, if something has grass on it, you can't climb it. And that's just something that you're eventually going to get used to. Is like, it doesn't tell you that. It's just, you learn, if it's green, you're not going to be able to climb it. It's overgrown. You can't do that. And there's so many things like that. Like the Naughty Dog yellow. Like, we learned very quickly, is like, Naughty Dog yellow means it's something I can climb. And then the Last of Us green means it's something that I can't. It's overgrown. Don't touch it. Don't even try. But there were a few places where I was like, I don't know what am I supposed to be doing right now?
So usually you have to climb under a bus. You crawl under
typically
something.
It's under. It's always, I was always down. Almost
yeah,
always
I
down.
thought that the range of motion, to your point, Alanah, about you felt the actual gameplay separate from the narrative, but the core of movement, combat, exploration, all that, even crafting. To me, I loved finding workbenches and customizing my gun for the sound design of the disassembly of the rifle and all the metallic and like springs moving and the screwdriver. And I texted a friend who's part of the Sony audio team, and I was just like, like really real. And same with the clickers, that nastiness, the real, like when you come behind them and stab them in a stealth kind of way. Every single time, Angela and I would say, could you imagine what that feels like on like your forearms, having to wrap around this thing? It's like, because they kind of look like coral reef.
Yeah,
so
I think like they'd be like hard.
And I was imagining all these textures where I was like, well, funguses aren't quite as bladed as a coral reef, even though it looks like that. So I imagine it kind of has some give to it.
It's probably a little bit spongy.
Yeah, like it really you feel that, and the voicing of all the various, like when you kill them, especially if you don't kill them stealthily, and they cry out in agony for a long time after they go down. That's really affecting after a while.
That stuff troubles me. Like, someone begged me not to kill them while I was playing the other day, and I genuinely didn't want to keep playing. Like, it was a bit too.
There is something that I wish.
That sense. There's a few things like that.
Yeah, when you have somebody in Last Stand, to use the Shadow of Mordor vernacular, I wish. Well, there's in some ways you can let them go, and they will stand back up and they will continue to kick your ass. I wish that the game would every once in a while would have had just somebody run away.
Yeah, I agree.
There's that to me.
This game sucks.
There's a cancel my pre-order. There's got to be something that was informing that decision to not be able to do. Either there was a limitation of the system, or there was like an intentional choice to not do that. But I would have loved that. That's a Shadow of Mordor thing. Like, you can let them go and they'll run away. They could very well come back, but that to me would have been awesome. It's like, I let you go, and then you brought 5 more of your friends back. Is just that to me is
consequences.
Yeah,
I have to say though,
the system would track that, right?
To your point though about everything being so conscientious, to me it's not a spoiler to say that this is a game that, whereas the first one puts us inside Joel to really understand why he would make this decision at the end, which I thought, as hard and awful as it was, from as global a perspective as possible, it's really hard to defend his decision. But through the lens of like a father, it's a completely easy to understand decision. And that's the brilliance of the first game. And what I love is that this one then says, now look at what sustained existence in this world, the gift that he thought he was giving her. Look what this world does to Ellie as a result. And so it's in a way, it's an elongated punishment of Joel's decision as well. And that moment, that first moment where it's not a cutscene, it's in the middle of gameplay. I distinctly remember what you're talking about, where I hit this guy and I thought I killed him, and then he's begging for his life. And I walked up, and the system, like, it gave me a prompt to strike him down. Right. And Ellie just walks, takes out like the wrench or whatever, and beats the guy to death, and was so like unsensational in doing so. And I remember thinking, wow, the fucking square button told me so much about where Ellie is right now.
But also, what does Dina say in that moment?
Can't remember.
She responds to that. She's like, Jesus Christ.
Oh yeah, you're right. Yeah, there's like a kind of shock from her.
There is the system. It's not just like, hey, you got this new upgrade, now you can do this thing. It's like the system changed, gave you a new button, a new thing to do, and that was informed by character and narrative, so that when you do that, the world responds and goes, there's been a change in your character. I've never seen a game do that, to where and if it has done, it's like, oh no, now he has X powers. But it was just more, it's such a cool way for the world to respond to something that a new ability that you've unlocked to be able to do that.
To like be afraid of you having that ability, basically.
Yeah. In the same way that, the world goes, she's out, if you run out of bullets, which is great. That's a cool system to track. But even the world just kind of going, we just noticed that now if this happens, you do this. That's
that to me, there were a lot of little details where I constantly felt like this is tracking Ellie's descent into darkness and like really incrementally. It's interesting how I do actually largely agree with you, Alanah, that I felt that the game theoretically could be trimmed a little. It's like each engagement, each area of the map could probably have like 5% shaved, and the overall would bring the game down where it would feel a little tighter. I do resonate with Troy's defense of like, look, it's just the world. But I kind of think of it like, right before we started recording, and Troy said, hey, remember when you had a problem with your USB? And then I told the same story, but 3 times longer. It's kind of like that, really. Like
Austin,
you did so with intent.
Yeah, exactly.
Goal that you set yourself, and therefore it's right. It's fine.
Exactly. You needed to really know all the steps of my process to know I tested the different USB ports.
Like some people wouldn't get the story, but I did. I figured it out. It's good.
So that's where
back to bathrooms.
Oh no! That's getting that all got cut.
Probably did all get cut. Yeah, all that preamble's gone.
Good, man.
The
audience wonder.
Mike, I did want to explicitly ask you, because I feel like you've spoken the least this episode. Like, did you have any unique thoughts you would like to share about the design of The Last of Us Part 2?
I mean, everyone's losing their minds quite rightly about the ropes. The ropes are very cool. And I don't know if, like, normal people know how cool the ropes are.
Explain to me why the ropes are
physics. The physics alone.
Well, the physics and the reliance on the physics. So physics is bad. Like, video game physics is, like, something that we never really rely on because it's finicky, it can go wrong, it can break just across the board. Like, physics is just not trustworthy. You don't tend to tie it to core systems. You can ragdoll an enemy, but it's only after they're dead and it's out of the way. So if they mess up, and they always mess up, right? And everyone's seen someone fly off into the sky when ragdolling or whatever. It doesn't really matter, it's fine. But to build an entire like game mechanic about dragging those ropes around is so bold and so stupid. And by the way, like specifically, I'd seen people talk about it before I played it, and the very first time I had a rope puzzle, it bugged out on me, and I was just like, oh, that's a shame. So I read back to a checkpoint. So it's not perfect, but like,
wow,
it's very cool. It's like IK based physics, like making stuff wrap around colliders, making stuff have weight and work in a proper way in that context. That's really cool. Technically, like that was someone's job for 5 years, and that's just impressive. It's similar to the again, something that went around among developers, but I don't know if normal people cared. The wine bottle in Half-Life Alyx. So yeah, really great shader, which kind of people just admire and respect that. Like when someone does something so beautifully in terms of the craft of like one specific aspect, that's the stuff I tend to resonate with. Other than that, I think it's cool. I think one thing I really like with, I don't know where it comes from on the team. I don't know how story works at Naughty Dog, and whether it's a Neil thing or whether it's the I imagine there's a narrative team or a mission team even. But like the one thing I love about it, which again you don't see in much games writing, and it's something I'm always catching myself doing, is I tell stories about people who are given a mission, they go and do the mission, then once they've done the mission, they get a reward, and they go and do another mission. Whereas one thing I love so far, just even in the first 5 hours, it is that kind of, life being the thing that happens when you're making plans kind of thing. There are so many points just in the first few hours of the game where you're going to a place, everything you've seen has told you that you're going to that place, you have items in your inventory ready to go to get you to that place, you have all of this set up, and then nothing. And it doesn't happen. And you just get knocked off course into something else. And that actually is harder to write than people probably necessarily think. It's really, the thing about being a writer is you know where the story's going at all times. So you've kind of got to keep fighting that instinct just to get the Star Wars action figures where they're meant to be so they can fight and do the cool thing you want them to do. So having stuff like when you get to Seattle, and you get the list of all the gates, and you've got like, a couple of them are marked up with the numbers and the others aren't, and it's like, oh, okay, I see where this is going. All right, I'm gonna have to open that, and then that gate you can't do because of this, and then that gate you can't, and then you've still got like 5 more on that list, and it's like, okay, let's go through here, and we're gonna have to go over there to do the thing to pick up and then you get jumped, and again, spoilers, I guess, but whatever. At this point, people have already had the game ruined for them. Like,
also, probably
moments,
fair to assume you're gonna get jumped a few times.
Yeah, exactly.
And this is also very early in the game.
Exactly, and but that, like, genuinely, like, I've seen a lot of conversation about kind of the game, and again, I've not gone very far in it, so I don't have an opinion on in terms of the story. But like, yeah, I think there are so many things that games are very good at striving for the big things, but we often are like either have never done the little thing, or we don't think to do it because we've not inherited the knowledge to get to there. So often, like, good game narratives are usually on a par with like bad movies. Like we celebrate, like Thomas Was Alone, won awards for its storytelling. Anyone who's got kids has seen 5 stories as good as Thomas Was Alone on children's television on a weekend. Like, it's a pretty straightforward standard story. I think that's true of so much game storytelling, that we don't get the fundamentals. And what I am impressed with in Last of Us is there's stuff in there like that, like the idea of a character has a goal, they're trying to get to the goal, and their course is corrected by something that happens on the way. That's bread and butter of most genre TV and fiction. Games don't do it. That, like, it gets the fundamentals lined up nicely in a way that I respect. I don't know about the bigger picture, but like, that deserves calling out. AAA games kind of doing that is impressive to me, and just like getting the fundamentals down.
Yeah.
One thing that I really applaud them for is that I didn't feel, and maybe there's stuff that was there that no longer was. By the time I got done with it, I thought that there was going to be so much that from the original pitch that was cut, and there's not. Like, all the big, there was a slightly different version at the end, but I mean, I was sitting there going, I remember when Neil first told me this idea, and it pretty much stayed true to that pitch. Like, he was like, this is what, and then this happens, and then this happens. I was like, holy shit.
Do you know, did he have a sense of this before finishing the first one?
No.
Like, do you know, like, was it just finish the first, clean break, start the second, or did he have a long-term trajectory in mind?
He, matter of fact, purposefully, he said, I didn't realize this. He was like, but he started coming up with an idea. I was like, I think I have an idea when they were doing Left Behind, which surprised me because I thought it was after that, after that game had shipped and he had some time away from it, that he was like, now I have an idea. But he said that he started kind of, we're Greg Miller talking about this, and he said that idea first came to him with this, is what would happen, what really happens to Ellie. Like, we really have gone as far with Joel as we can. That story, God, we left everything out on the dance floor with him. There is only so much, and that's the beauty of their stories. Like, there's only so much that Joel needs to give us. He's given us everything. And it was more about what happens in the aftermath of that, making that decision. And do we do another story of him now trying to find redemption? It's like, man, we've played that guitar out. I will say something, speaking of guitars. Are you guys seeing all the videos of people playing their own music?
Yeah, it's lovely.
This fucking controller has driven me crazy, and I've loved it and I've hated it. But specifically this thing right here.
Wait. People are playing their own songs with the guitar minigame?
With the guitar.
Yes.
No way.
And recording it. There's a dude that did Hallelujah and recorded it. He did it. He goes, I did a duet with Ellie. And Ellie is playing. By the way, you can finger pick. Huh. And I've never seen the normally it's like, okay, strum, right? Or you can go tap on it somewhere. We
bring props to this show, so
what you got?
It's whatever, don't worry about it. Oh, it says Beyond from my GN's podcast. Beyond.
Wow, dude. I didn't realize until much later in that you could literally just go, this will be my top E, this is my bottom E, this is the A, the D, the G, the B.
I didn't know that.
And so people started doing like finger picking, and there's a guy that did, like, he tweeted to Neil, and he does Hallelujah. And I was like, that's some emergent design, right? That is someone at Sony going, you got to do something that includes the trackpad. was like, shit.
I think it's the best use of it I've ever seen.
It is the best use of it. The best use of it.
You know what's so funny? As soon as you remember the scene in Family Guy where Stewie is doing the songwriting demonstration, where he's like, "You got your G chord, and then your C chord." So the hilarious thing was that I pulled that up and I was trying to play along with that in the guitar bit with Ellie.
That's the weirdest use of that.
That's the most I've ever heard.
I gotta parallel this. But the funny thing is that the guitar doesn't let you play in the key of G. It lets you play in the key of C, lets you play in the key of D, but it doesn't let you play in the key of G. So the only way to match Stewie was to switch keys halfway through back and forth. And I was like, that's fucking hard to do accurately. I was like, I gotta
0 out of 10.
I gotta call.
I was gonna say,
I got feedback for Sony.
Yeah, there's some weird chord structures. I was like, you would never play that chord on guitar. On piano, you would. There's like an A flat, and there's like stuff like that.
I was laughing. I was like, they didn't have her capoing for some of those keys. I was like, that probably would have been how she got there.
Well, what I love the two things that were pretty funny. Future Days is capo 2, so I had to play that song with capo 2. The fact that you would be able to find a guitar, much less a capo,
I know,
in that world I was like, that's a bit of a stretch.
No, but
Joel's making the guitars.
I was going to say,
but then he also does that. So what I didn't realize, and Neil and I even had this conversation where I was like, man, if I found this guitar, this thing would, I mean, to restore this guitar. And I don't know if it was an afterthought to say that Joel, which I love when you go into his house and you realize the guitar that he gave her is not the first guitar that he made.
I love that whole segment.
The house
is like that's an indie game. Like you could ship that as like from a narrative point of view. What that's actually telling you about the man is genuine.
It's What Remains of Edith Finch.
It is the
like
funeral.
Home, right?
Yeah.
I texted Neil and I said the house is the funeral and the wake. The front of it is like a Beatle. It's like Sgt. Pepper's. You could just unpack so much about it. But like there's a processional that Ellie makes to a outdoor space where there is flowers. You walk inside and it's very solemn, but there's the do you remember? And we have this is everything that we do with a funeral. And then there's the celebration of it, which is the wake. And then life moves on. Like
just to jump on that, the flowers really affected me because it was like, what a change that Joel has ingratiated himself to this community.
Yeah.
In contrast to where he was in the first game, he wasn't a community guy, but he had really altered where he was in life to the point that even though we don't see it, the fact that many people would have left flowers on his door in this world.
But you're right. People,
as soon as I
people
saw
liked
them,
him.
I was like,
people cared about him. I really feel like he retired. And that's like he became this guitar maker. He was chiseling. I think you see a wooden horse, I think.
Yeah,
he was
writing
it's like
poems.
A cowboy, right?
Yeah, I love it.
He's writing poems.
Old man
But I mean,
Joel.
the beauty of it is that for Joel to, first of all, to reveal so much about himself, the notion of him retiring is interesting. But the reason why the flowers affected me so much is that this is obviously, yes, Jackson is safe because they're protected, but people still die. They even talk about it as like, oh, those the people that left. Like they've experienced loss. So death, they probably view death very stoically. It's just like, this is what happens, and this is where we bury people and everything else. But for Joel, it's like, no, this was a pillar of our community, and it was someone who'd only been there for a few years. Versus he wasn't the patriarch of the community. He was just old Joel. Did you guys find Gustavo?
I saw a guy playing and I thought, oh, that's cool, and I didn't get close enough. And then I saw screenshots and I was like, fuck, that's pretty cool.
Yeah,
I had no idea.
I don't know that I did. I probably did. I feel like I explored everything very thoroughly.
As Ellie's walking through, and I still need to ask Neil if the dog that you pet in the beginning when you're walking through the town, which is right after you meet or see Gustavo, he's sitting on a, huh?
I would have done it. It just feels like so long ago now. Been through so much since then.
That's so true.
I think that that's Buckley, which is the dog from the first game, because she says, "How you doing, old timer?" And so it stands to reason that would be Buckley.
Like from the little commune where you first find Tommy, you mean that dog?
And the story behind that is right when we started doing that, I had lost my dog, and Neil had experienced the loss of his dog, and it was very, very traumatic for him. And for the longest time, that was the biggest loss that he had had in his life. And the kindness that he extended to me to be able to say, "What's the name of the dog?" And I was like, "Can we name him Buckley?" He said, "Absolutely." He gave me that honor. He had every right as the writer and the creator of this thing to go, "Actually, I want that to be my dog's name." And he didn't. And I found that that's one of the greatest gifts he's ever given me. And so I was like, "Oh shit, I need to ask him, is that," because you never say the dog's name. I was like, if that's Buckley again, that's cool. So
everything to do with Bear got me extra hard because my chocolate Labrador's name was Chelsea, but I nicknamed her Bear. And she died way prematurely, and it sucked, and it was like still so awful. She got bitten by a tick.
Wow.
Dead in 24 hours.
Like an infection? Like a
bitten
weird
by a tick killed her. And she was on all the anti-tick medicine. Yeah. It fucking sucked. It was very, I love that dog so much. Light of my life. And I didn't cry for 24 hours because I was just so
I've been there before.
What? And I still haven't gotten a dog because I feel like I haven't recovered from that. But
how long ago was that?
2 years ago.
I want to encourage you with the same words that a friend told me when I literally was telling him what happened to my dog, and he was just nodding the entire time. He was like, "Yeah, man, yeah." I'm like, "Dude, do you not understand how human emotions work and the fact that I'm telling you an incredibly sad story?"
In fairness, you're also a robot. We did establish.
Or an alien.
Yeah, sorry.
And I said that I literally was screaming in the street. And he said, "The heart that I hear breaking reveals the capacity that it has to love. And I just know a lot of dogs out there that need love." And he said, "I would encourage you to go share that love."
It's
There's
the
a dog that needs
sudden
that
loss
love.
of it that got me. But this is definitely a separate conversation about how now I'm just anxious all the time about the idea that I would get a dog and that something would happen and I just can't do anything about it. But my point there was really just that hit me extra hard because the dog was named Bear, and you hear them say Bear, and I was just like,
basically what you're afraid of is that you're going to get another dog and the two of you are going to end up in a room and you're going to be yelling at it like, "You don't know what loss is."
Well done.
Is that where that's going?
Exactly. Before we wrap up, there's another design aspect that I really wanted to talk about, which is so we've spoken about how open a lot of the I want to say combat arenas are, and I have had plenty of instances in the game where I've not known where to go, but then and I actually like that, and I think I've spoken to you guys about this. I'm anti using the listen button. Always. I just don't use it. I go through every encounter I can without using it. And obviously it's an option for people who'd prefer to, but it meant that I'm in this world that all of these areas feel quite large, and I just have to listen or look. And you can see a pretty good field of view around you. But it does mean that often if you don't see where the enemies are, you actually don't know what forward is. And that's the thing that the video games rely on so heavily is more enemies are in the direction of forward, but because I have no idea where they are, I don't know where forward is. So I feel like this game, with, again, those combat arenas being a lot more open than normal, does a very good job of hiding its pathways. And I don't know if I've even told you guys this before. The thing that makes a game my favorite game versus a game that I like is level design. Level design is my absolute, when I really think hard about the games that I'm fucking incredible, it's level design. Dishonored 2 is just right up there for me.
Does that mean for you design. That it's clear to you where you should be going, or that it's more of a challenge for you to know where you're going?
No, that it's smart about communicating with me where I should be going.
Okay.
Or that I have a lot of options. So Dishonored 2, I could gush about
multiple
that
points.
Several hours, but the idea that there are options that'll funnel but doesn't do it in a blatant way. There isn't a climb on this ledge, don't climb on this ledge. Last of Us Part 2, I got lost a lot, but when I started actually really paying attention to the level design and the way that it tries to tell you which direction is correct, I just started getting more and more and more impressed by it. They hide it really, really well. Really good use of lighting, which is obviously a common way to communicate to players where to go. But they also use different shades of lighting. Often a reddish light is used to indicate that there are going to be enemies in a certain direction, which is something that seems so subtle and so unnecessary, but probably after a while of training keys you in to anticipate that. But they also use like white lighting coming from a certain point to indicate that something is the right thing to look at. They also use that, they faked out with that a couple of times. There is something that looks like it's spotlighted that you are supposed to look at as a mistake. Like it is red herringed you with lighting multiple times in the game too, in a way that I keep being like, they just...
There's a lot of really interesting red herrings in the design, I think.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not trying to cut you off if you're still going.
No, go ahead.
Well, because there's one thing that I really wanted to bring up that's sort of adjacent to this. Slight tangent, but so I have a friend. I know, par for the course.
It's going to be 15 minutes.
Yeah. Well, so there's just a story I've been dying to share with you guys.
About your USBs?
Yes. So I have this guy named Brandon Cole, who I met at GDC like 5 or 6 years ago because he is a blind gamer, and he gave a speech about accessibility for blind gamers to the audio community during one of the audio things at GDC. And he came up to me and told me this whole story about experiencing Journey, and I was like, "Is that game remotely playable blind?" And he was like, "No, it's terrible." And he was like, "It sounded amazing, but just completely unplayable." And so it led to this conversation. And so shortly before Last of Us Part 2 came out, he sent me a thing where he had been giving a speech at a conference for game like a small kind of niche conference about game accessibility for blind gamers, motor control, like people that have issues with motor control or eye-hand coordination or reaction times. There are various reasons for whatever reason. Obviously, deaf gamers. There's a whole subset of like, how do we try to make games more inclusive? And he was giving a speech there because his whole thing is he's found all these amazing workarounds in games that like he found ways to make them accessible that they're not actually originally designed for, but there's just quirks of the system. He talked about how Resident Evil 6 is completely playable by him, and he's quite comfortable at it, and by using the systems in ways they're not designed for. And it's fucking awesome. We had a long conversation the other day, and he told me that he was asked to give a speech, and he knew that there were a couple of Naughty Dog folks in the audience. And so he gave this speech where he said, very often when there's a game he wants to experience, his wife will play it for him, and he'll just kind of ride along. And he said, my ultimate fantasy was that everyone talks about how great The Last of Us is. And my fantasy is I would always want to be able to play a game like that for her and not the other way around. And of course, and he said that very sly. He knew there were Naughty Dog people in the audience. So they approached him and they were like, this is actually really interesting. And so for the entire back half of development, he flew to LA multiple times and consulted with them. And they are now parading around that this is the most accessible AAA game ever. You can play the entire game.
It's phenomenal.
It's
Have you gone into that section?
I did. Because of talking to him, I went through insane amounts of customization.
Are you talking about Steve Saylor, or are you talking about a different person?
My guy, his name's Brandon Cole.
Steve Saylor also put up something as well that is just heartwarming to watch. He's a brilliant, beautiful person who the second that it's almost like Cory Barlog reading off his game reviews or his Metacritic. It's Steve Saylor going through and understanding when he was like, there's so much here. There's just so much here. I got a message from someone who with cerebral palsy, who talks about this is the most accessible game ever. So for no other reason than that, whether people agree with the design, agree with the narrative, agree with the characters, agree with the world, agree with the gameplay, agree with anything else, hate it, think it's disrespectful, whatever. I've got 2 stories that for me are like, if we shipped the game for no other 2 people on this planet than those 2 people, that to me is a win. That to me is an absolute win.
Absolutely.
The thing that excites me with accessibility is it's just extreme design. Like, it's just really good generally. And it's very interesting when you look at like all of these features. They're useful. Like making a game accessible. And to be clear, like on our games, we're indie. We often don't have the time or resources to do an amazing job of this. So we're definitely. I'm definitely not holding our stuff up as paragons. But looking at something like Last of Us 2, where they've done fantastically. All of that stuff then plays back into the main audience. You can the audience who don't need the accessibility features, but that will enhance their experience. Like And I love that. I think that's so neat. And it's also just, there's so many places where they've made good use of it. Like the tutorial pop-ups use the renderer that's designed for the strong. I think it is, at least it looks like it's using the same renderer that's used for the visibility mode, where they're kind of making characters render different colors. So even just building that for this community over here, then allowed them to put it in somewhere else. It's just, it's a really good, I feel like Last of Us 2 is going to be using a lot of arguments to just add really good accessibility to other games. It's a
Can
really
I ask a question?
Gears 5 is also really good. Just
Mike,
feel like I should mention that.
Do you feel that if there was a category for accessibility in games, just like there is for design and character and sound and everything
like
else,
awards, you mean?
Awards, yeah.
Or something? No.
Do you feel that would be a motivator enough for studios to be able to, like if a publisher could quantify, oh, well, if we can get an award for this, do you think that would, or is there just, it's like, man, we're stretched right now. Like every penny that we get from a publisher is already spoken for and sometimes over. Do you feel that because that I was not aware, I've been tertiarily aware of the conversation of accessibility before, but never have I seen the benefit of it as much as I have with this game. And so I'm wondering if, just like The Last of Us before set a narrative standard almost for games, and even the way that Naughty Dog has kind of created a pipeline for how games should incorporate, of AAA status should incorporate performance capture and those kind of fidelity of performances. Do you feel like they could do the same thing with accessibility, and do you think this will change?
I think inevitably it will. I mean, but bluntly, everything in games is really expensive and tough to do right now. Please go away and leave me alone is like the default stance to any request that comes towards a dev team. But we bother with narrative, we bother with good music, we bother with good act. Like we can choose to put that focus into it. And I think anything that kind of highlights where it's done well. I think the other thing that's really interesting is anything that highlights solutions. Game devs, we are very good at stealing each other's ideas. We're very, very good at seeing something work in someone else's game.
Ooh, let's do that.
Oh, that's good. A great example of this, Last of Us, that visibility mode they do. So anyone who's gone into the settings will have seen this, where you can switch it on and it basically makes like player character bright blue, enemies bright red, everything else grayscale. Any developer working in a modern engine and with a good, art pipeline and art technical director looks at that and goes,
"That's good.
That takes an afternoon."
Oh,
genuinely. And it's shaders. Essentially, you set up the pipeline depending on how things are set up. In theory, making it so that all of your player characters' art is tinted blue, all of your enemies are tinted red, and everything else is grayscale is not hard. Once you've come up with the idea for it,
it's like the Nemesis
months
system
of working out which.
Well,
I feel like you always say that, Mike. It's more about who came up with the idea. And then
it's like a Carlos Santana guitar solo. It's like, you could play it, but he did it first. It's a Picasso. He did it first.
That's why games keep getting better. Is because the first person does the thing and climbs up that mountain and works out how to get up there. But they leave I'm not a mountain climber, but like the stake in the ground with the rope hanging off so someone else
You
can
are
just
not a
climb
mountain
up
climber.
I'm not a mountain climber. I don't know how any of this works.
It's Death Stranding. You're leaving ladders everywhere.
You need... Yeah, exactly. There you go. It's Death Stranding. But that's important. And so I think everyone who's seen that, like I looked at that and I was like, there's not really a very good excuse to not put that mode into future games from us that kind of are doing 3D characters in like a third-person perspective. If we're doing that in a game, that would make sense. So I think that's what's exciting. I think, highlighting excellence works. Highlighting excellence. I don't think people will do it just to try and win an award, however awesome this ceremony is and everything. I don't think that's the goal. I don't think that's what does it. I think it's people hearing about it. When Last of Us does it, everyone in the industry plays Last of Us. Of course they do. So all of that stuff gets kind of pulled back into the mindset of everyone who's making games. But there's probably an awesome indie game that came out 2 weeks ago that had a really innovative approach to like, how do you communicate for blind gamers, audio cues in the environment. And I've not heard of it, and no one else has heard of it. But if that was found by an award and highlighted and celebrated, that team gets the credit they deserve for doing something cool. But B, the rest of us, I cannot reiterate this enough, get to steal it.
Yeah.
And that's how the industry moves forward in general. And it sounds negative, and I think the audience sometimes reacts badly when I talk about this stuff because it sounds like, oh, stealing's not artistic. Stealing is the most artistic thing in the world.
Yeah, video games are still so young, though. Like, I feel like you have to. Like, everything's still Ocarina of Time.
Invented the wheel. Yeah.
Or Half-Life.
Exactly. We're all building on the shoulders of giants. And if this was an area where we can see excellence faster, then we can all learn from it. And some things are technically challenging, some things are easy. The one that always comes up that I think the audience thinks is very easy but really isn't is font sizes, making it so you can make the font bigger on UIs. That's one of those things that is really difficult in a game engine a lot of the time. Just because, let me put it a different way. It's really difficult if you decide to do it last. If you do it first, if you plan for it like most things, it's absolutely fine. But if you release your game and everyone says the font's too small, like doing the patch to fix that is really stressful and difficult.
Interesting.
Because it's not Word. You can't just go select all the text
42.
and make it a bigger font size. Yeah, it's not quite how it works. Unfortunately, It would be lovely if it was. But that's the thing is I think we don't need to necessarily give excuses to the audience or explain this stuff. But by seeing stuff out there, we can learn from it and put it into the games. And Last of Us just absolutely set a yardstick for us all to walk towards. Again, like using metaphors for, I don't know.
You're not much of a walker, are you? I'm not a mountain climber. I'm not a walker.
Gears 5 also does
just
a
for the
really
audience,
good job
Troy
of that
has
stuff.
on this call. Before we started the call, Troy told me what did you say? I looked tired.
I didn't say you looked tired. I just wanted to make sure you're all right. Because you
Haggard.
signed on and normally you have this bright, cheery smile. Had nothing to do with your appearance.
It's been a tough week, Troy.
It's been a rough week.
Tough week in the world. Yeah,
That's why I actually was celebrating the fact that I know you well enough to know that it's like, oh man, my boy's had a rough week. I just want to make sure you're all right.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
All right.
I shall
Now's
go
the
walking.
moment where
That's
Mike
that's
pulls
how I'm
the
gonna chill
book
out.
of Mike
or
facial
mountain climbing.
expressions. And
I've got a mountain climbing book. Let's just that'd be great. Wouldn't that be amazing?
On that note, we will see you all next week.
Bye.